It's about Scotland's future, it's about your future, it's about all our futures. Let's try to get some answers. To the big debate, Choosing Scotland's Future. This is the second in a series of discussions we'll be holding in the run-up to the vote on independence in 2014. Whatever your hopes and concerns, your expectations or your reservations, we're going to be giving them an airing. To ask the key questions tonight, we have a studio audience from people from across Scotland representing a cross-section of opinion. Thank you so much for taking part tonight. And here to answer them are Patrick Harvey, the convener of the Scottish Green Party; Scottish Labour's Deputy Leader, Anna Sarwar; Nicola Sturgeon, the Deputy Leader of the SNP; and the Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Ruth Davidson. And let's now go straight to our first question, and it comes from Karen Tate. Karen.
Hi, I'd like to ask the panel what living in an independent Scotland could do for me.
Right. What living in independent Scotland could do for Karen, and presumably others like her. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, first and foremost, independence means that the big decisions about Scotland, about the future of our country, about how our resources are spent, are taken by people here in Scotland. We're a rich country, we've got a skilled population, abundant natural resources. Independence gives us the ability to use those resources to create more wealth for individuals, for families and communities, to improve social justice in our country, and to take decisions, for example, if we so choose, as the SNP would, to not have Trident nuclear missiles on the River Clyde, but instead use those resources to benefit people in Scotland. It's about putting the power and the decision-making in the hands of people who live here, the people who care most about the future of Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
The truth is, the power already lies with the people of Scotland. Sovereignty lies with the people of Scotland. And can I just say from the outset that we will have disagreements on this panel today, but one thing we all agree on, everyone in this room, everyone on this panel, is that we all love Scotland. We just have a different idea about what's in the best interests of our country. I don't want this referendum to turn into a false choice between who loves Scotland and who hates the Tories. The truth is, we all love Scotland, and sorry Ruth, most of us hate the Tories. But actually Scotland's played a really important part in creating the success that is the United Kingdom. 300 years of shared history, shared security and shared prosperity. The fact that a Scot was the founder of the Bank of England, a Welshman who created our NHS, an Englishman our welfare state. But actually this isn't about our history, it's about our future. And I passionately believe that Scotland's best interests lie economically, socially, politically and emotionally by being part of the United Kingdom. Scots can stand stronger and taller in partnership with England, Wales and Northern Ireland as part of the UK, and that's where we'll make the positive case for the United Kingdom.
Well, just before we go on to ask the rest of the panel, can I just ask Karen, what do you hope that an independent Scotland could do for you?
I do. I do hope that an independent Scotland can give us a much more prominent economy especially, and make life better for the people of Scotland, better jobs, and better conditions as well, living conditions.
OK, Patrick Harvey, is that what's going to happen?
I think the only honest answer to that question is we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen to the Scottish economy if we vote for independence, but we don't know what's going to happen to the Scottish or the British economy if Scotland stays in the UK. We're in profoundly unsettling and challenging economic times. We've just seen the failure of a centre-right neoliberal economic model which has been the flavour of choice of UK governments, whether it's Labour or the Tories, with or without the Liberal Democrat helpers. You know, the opportunity to break our dependence on that economic model is the opportunity to make our own successes or failures. None of us can tell you, none of us can know in our own heart of hearts what's going to happen to the local economy, the national economy or the global economy over the next few years. But the opportunity that we have is to take a new direction, actually to start working out some choices. I think it's important that we debate this question openly way in advance of the referendum, so that by the time we come to the referendum, more than 2 years away, we have some specific proposals. And the pro-independence parties, myself and the SNP and the others, and non-party political people who are asking you to vote yes, I think need to be much more specific by the time we get to the referendum itself, rather than saying it can be all things to all people, rather than saying all the policy decisions are for taking after the referendum. I think we need to be clear. I think we need to give people a positive reason to vote yes. And to me that means transformational politics. It means moving away from that centre-right dead hand that we've seen over the last 30 years and more gripping the UK economy and politics.
Okay. Gentleman here. Can we have the gentleman on the front row here?
Can I just say to Mr Harvey and Ms Sturgeon, you just blamed the neoliberal centre-right. If I can take you back to 2007, Alex Salmond wrote a letter, Ms Sturgeon, in 2007 to Sir Fred Goodwin. And in 2007, in that letter, it was picked up by Channel 4 News that he would offer every assistance for Mr Goodwin to take the ABN AMRO takeover to its, its logical conclusion, which was takeover. That led to the biggest banking collapse. Royal Bank of Scotland, now one moment, and the Royal Bank of Scotland would have been a Scottish bank under independence, and Scottish taxpayers would have picked up the bill. In 2008, Mr Salmond then travelled to Harvard University and made his now infamous Arc of Prosperity Celtic Line speech, which is actually mysteriously missing from the SNP website. I'm sure the search party's gone out. But in that speech, he told us we were in an arc of prosperity with countries like Norway, Ireland and Iceland. And a few months later, Iceland had the biggest banking collapse of any developed nation. And finally, if I can say, at the same time, Mr Salmond said that we should be in the euro. Now, at the moment, Mr Salmond's saying none of these things. So the centre-right neoliberal agenda that may well have failed, Mr Salmond bought into that and at the same time cozied up to Rupert Murdoch.
That's fine. Can I just point out at this stage, we will be discussing actually quite a few of these subjects in more detail later on in the programme, but fairly briefly, Nicola Sturgeon, if you don't mind a response to
I would like to think we've all learned lessons from what happened to the banks, but the banks collapsed under the UK, not in an independent Scotland. And let's remember, the previous Labour government gave Fred Goodwin a knighthood that he's now had taken away from him. So I don't think we'll take any lessons from Labour and the Conservatives about banking or about what happened in the world of banking. I mean, you mentioned Norway. Norway is a richer country than the United Kingdom. It's got one of the lowest rates of unemployment right now across the whole of Europe. It is an example of a successful independent country using its resources for the good of its people. Right. Well, Anas, a little while ago, Anas used the National Health Service as a reason to stay within the United Kingdom. The health service is being broken up and privatised in England. It's only because we have powers over the National Health Service in Scotland that we're able to...
we have to take... Ruth Davidson hasn't had a chance to get in at any stage yet. So Ruth Davidson.
I would like to turn back the First Lady's question about what she would hope for in independent Scotland and actually talk about what you already have as part of the United Kingdom. And that brings me into the second gentleman's point. And that's about not only do we share all the advantages, but we also share risks. And I think when you're looking at a country and a world economy at the moment, a European economy at the moment, you don't just look at the risks that we share and the stability that we have in a military sense, although as part of the UK we have that, but you also look at it in an economic sense and say, yes, absolutely, what happened in the banks was dreadful and terrible, and it was only because we had the might of a larger nation, one of the G8, that we were able to absorb that and being able to make sure that people didn't lose all their deposits. There wasn't the kind of issues and problems that happened in Iceland.
Have democratic reform in the banking system, the opportunity to actually move away from this stranglehold that a handful of mega banks have. There's been no move towards banking reform either under Labour or the Tories.
So thank you. The gentleman here.
I repeat that, Isabel. Sorry, I've got to come back in there because that's actually Patrick Harvey's just factually wrong. There's huge reform that's going on in the banking sector right now.
Yeah, and
not
one more
only,
mega bank.
Not only is there a levy that's being taken every year off the banks in order to help subsidise, we're working in a cross-country agreement to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again, not just in our country, but right across Europe.
Okay.
And we're looking at liquidity within banks themselves. So to say that nothing's happened, frankly, Patrick, is nonsense.
Let's get a comment from the gentleman here.
Isabel, Patrick Harvey just said that they don't have the answers. Isn't the point that people across Scotland are asking? The SNP, whose party has been in existence for almost 80 years, still don't have big, substantial answers to the questions that people are asking on the economy, on defence, on welfare. And time after time, the SNP have no answers to these big questions. They're asking us to say yes to a proposition that has no information, detail or flesh whatsoever. Isn't that a bit cheeky, Nicola Sturgeon?
Now, this gentleman here, in the middle over here.
I'd just like to go back to Mr Sarwar's remarks about shared prosperity. I come from Inverclyde, which is an unemployment black spot, has been since Margaret Thatcher killed the shipyards down there. We don't see any shared prosperity at all. I think we'd do better in an independent Scotland, to be honest.
And the gentleman here. Sorry, the gentleman here in the striped jumper.
Just at the start, Nicola Sturgeon said it was under the UK government that the Bank of Scotland and various other banks went through troubles. But then again, we've also got Greece and Spain and all throughout Europe, countries and banks failing. So is that the UK government's fault as well? It's a global economy. And what would Scotland not be better as part of a bigger group of countries, the UK, to try and get away through that and just have a bit more security in troubled times?
Right, thank you very much for that panel. We will be, this is going to be a recurring theme I'm sure you can come back to in more detail slightly later in the programme. But let's go on now to question 2 and Ailey Clark. Ailey.
The issue the Scottish people really want to know about is whether in 10 years' time Scotland will be financially better off if they leave the Union. Please, can we have some straight answers?
Right. Patrick Harvey, will Scotland be financially better off?
I think it would be a real mistake to vote yes or no on this question on the basis of whether you think individually you might be a wee bit better off or a wee bit worse off. I think the question is not just about whether we get richer. We've had, for decades, when we had economic growth and when we had recession, we've had growing inequality. We've had profound damage to the environment. We've had a failure on social justice and other things that give people quality of life. And that's at a time when GDP was going up or down. To me, as a Green, and this is a debate within the Green movement as well. Not everybody in the Green movement will end up on the yes side, but I think most of us will, and I certainly will. The opportunity to redefine what we mean by economic success. This is not just about whether we're a wee bit richer or a wee bit poorer. It's about whether we can create a better society, a more cohesive society, one in which we actually look after each other a bit better, one in which we look after our environment a bit better. And there are so many examples of policy areas where the Scottish Parliament simply is bound at the moment. It can't act to achieve a more equal society, can't act to achieve some of the business regulation that I think is necessary to stop people and the environment being exploited. So right. I think it'd be a mistake to vote on this question just on whether you think it'll make us a wee bit richer or a wee bit poorer. I think it's much deeper than that.
Ruth Davison.
I think the question comes almost in two parts, because there's a question there about whether individuals will be richer or not, and that's to do with opportunities for jobs for our young people coming out of schools. I noticed when the pro-independence launch was on Friday, there wasn't a single businessman that I saw anywhere near the stage. I thought was an interesting comment on how the RBS chair executive on the video, yes, RBS did such a good job as well. In terms of
after his time, should be said.
And looking at that, but also it's about countries being able to pay their bills and looking after the least advantaged in our society. And you're looking for facts and figures. Well, let me give you some facts and figures. Over the last 10 years, the welfare spend in Scotland has been bigger every single year than the entire tax take from all North Sea oil revenues. And even Alex Salmond doesn't say he wants all revenues from the North Sea in an independent Scotland. And for 2010, the last year we've got full figures, that number was 3 times, the welfare spend in Scotland was 3 times the entire North Sea oil tax take. So I think what people have to bear in mind when they look forward is not just about figures on debt and deficit, but it's also about those things that are paid for now across the whole of the UK that Scotland would be paying for by itself. Things like welfare, things like defence spend, things like subsidies to onshore wind farms that are going up at quite some rate of knots, and Citibank says will cost Scotland £4 billion on its own in an independent Scotland. So there is a lot of facts and figures that we have to drill down on, facts and figures that we're not getting from the pro-separatist campaign, and facts and figures we need to get so we can make an informed choice.
At this point, it might be useful if we just check with the entire panel, as Patrick suggested earlier. Can anybody actually say at this stage, hand on heart, if we will be better off or not, given nobody can predict the coming economic cycle? Nicola Sturgeon?
The success of any country anywhere in the world is down to how good its government is and how good the decisions that government takes. But I believe with every fibre of my being that an independent Scotland does have the potential to be financially better off as an independent country than we are right now. I mean, let's talk facts and figures, Ruth. The government expenditure and revenue report that's published every year, not by politicians but by civil servants, shows that right now, if Scotland was an independent country, we'd be around £500 for every person in Scotland better off than we are right now. So there's some facts and figures for you. And Ruth talks about welfare spending and things like that. What she forgets to tell you is each and every one of us that pays taxes in Scotland right now currently pays for all of these things. We more than pay our way within the United Kingdom. And for any politician or for anybody else to argue in any way that Scotland is subsidised and couldn't stand on our own 2 feet and be prosperous as an independent country, I don't think is being honest with you.
Okay. Anna Sauer, is it not the case actually that, although we can't say Scotland's a net contributor because we're running a deficit at the moment, that actually Scotland contributes more for its per capita share?
No one is on this panel saying that Scotland is too weak or too little to be successful as a country. So of course Scotland can be a success as a country. The interesting point was when Nicola was answering the question from the gentleman at the front, she gave the example of Norway, but what she didn't want to say was that Alex Salmond was quoted not long ago saying that he would give an arm and a leg to have the economic problems of Ireland. I wonder if we'll still give an arm and a leg to have the economic problems of Ireland. The reality is actually, while I disagree with Patrick when he says that he supports independence, actually at least he says what he believes, and that's not what we see from Nicola from the SNP or from Alex Salmond. It's not credible to say that actually we'd be better off as a separate country, but actually we want true independence, but at the same time we'll give our biggest business partner at the moment, England, but then our biggest... Let me just finish my point, sorry Patrick, just finish my point.
You can't say what's going to happen to the economy inside the UK
Just finish my point for a second. It's to say we're going to actually make our biggest business partner, our biggest business competitor, and have a foreign country set our interest rates, spend our spending limits and our borrowing limits. That's not credible economic policy, and that's why you see in every single poll that is done, the vast majority of people say that they believe we're better off as part of the United Kingdom. I want to remain such.
This gentleman here at the front.
I'm from Aberdeen, actually, near the northeast Scotland, oil and gas resource area. But my point, actually, everybody like independence, democracy, freedom of speech. This is good. Everybody like it. Britain at this moment 4th position in the world economically. But if it is actually become independent country, will be 4 times 4, 16, or become second in position or first in position? What will be the position of the Scotland that time?
Okay, thank you. This gentleman in the middle of the row here. Yes, you sir. Thank you.
I think Patrick Harvey's right when he says there's bigger issues than just the kind of economic wallet, as it were. But surely that being the case, the devolution max option gives us many of the benefits without very, very few of the risks.
Okay. Can I just very quickly ask for a show of hands here? How many people here think Devo Max should be an option on the referendum ballot? Oh, that's interesting. You're divided on that one. This lady here had her hand up. Yeah.
You talk about the economy. I'd just like to ask Ms Sturgeon in particular. Your party, or Mr Salmond, was a while talking about the Bank of England having contributing to our interest rates and things. How can we then be an independent country if they're, involved in our economic policy? How does that make us an independent country?
Okay. Well, actually, let's pick up that question also with Nicholas Black. Nicholas, this is something that you were particularly interested in.
Yeah, would an independent Scotland be in the euro or stick with sterling? And would using either make it truly independent?
Okay. Right, Nicholas Sturgeon, the issue about what currency we use and how much independence we can have over fiscal policy if monetary policy is tied into another country.
Well, we want to stay in sterling. We think there would be advantages in terms of price stability for Scotland in that, but also advantages to the UK because our exports, our oil and gas exports, our whisky exports, our range of other exports make a massive contribution to the United Kingdom balance of payments. So there are advantages in both ways for that. The real levers we need with independence to get our economy growing, to create wealth and prosperity, are fiscal levers. We don't have any fiscal levers, meaningful fiscal levers at the moment. That's what we need to be independent in order to get our economy growing, and that's one of the key advantages of being independent.
When did you change your mind? Because originally you said...
When did you change your mind? Tony Blair used to argue to go into the euro. You're not arguing that now, are you?
Because originally you said at the earliest opportunity we should look to join the euro. Now you're saying we want to stay part of...
Tony Blair wanted to go into the euro, so you've changed your mind
the interesting thing was Tony Blair wanted to join the euro, but Gordon Brown as Chancellor set 5 key tests. You have no tests. The only test you have is what can we say that we can try and persuade people that actually everything will be fine.
It seems there's one rule for Labour and another for everybody else.
The important issue about the euro is, look, I'm not going to try and make some comparison between Greece and Scotland because I don't believe we would be in that situation. But actually, there's one lesson from the Eurozone crisis, is that you can't have a monetary union without a fiscal and a political union.
True.
You can't.
That's not the key lesson from the
And what the SNP are trying to say is, we can stay part of the sterling, let England set our interest rates, probably a Tory government set our interest rates, our spending limits and our borrowing limits, but actually everything will be fine. It's not a credible policy. And the reason why they no longer want to join the euro isn't because they don't believe it anymore. It's because they realise it's immensely unpopular and they realise that people will run a million miles away from it.
Right. Nicholas, I'll answer that specifically about what sort of controls you can have. And in terms of going into the euro, how long can you wait before you have to go into the euro if you stay in the EU?
Well, there's nothing that would compel an independent Scotland within the European Union to go into the euro, and we've said very clearly for the foreseeable future we would not advocate entry to the euro. I think Anas is wrong about the key lesson of the Eurozone crisis. The key lesson of that crisis is you can't have a successful monetary union when you've got wildly divergent economies, like the richest parts of Germany and the poorest parts of Greece. That's not the case across the countries of the UK, where productivity levels, for example, are very similar. And I think Professor David Bell recently described it as an optimal currency
And the other lesson is
union.
you can have a successful monetary union. It's called the United Kingdom.
Right,
Ruth
Davidson, with no fiscal independence, so that we're locked into austerity politics.
Ruth Davidson, should we take it for granted that the Bank of England will be the lender of last resort?
Well, actually, no, we shouldn't. But I think as somebody who's never changed their mind on the euro and a party who's never really changed their mind on the euro, I think we go back to the fundamental question.
Is that a good thing if circumstances change? Do you never change your mind?
Well, I think let's look at the circumstances right now. And I think the fundamental question that the SNP haven't answered when it comes to the Europe is that they don't accept or won't admit that a separate Scottish state would have to apply to join the EU. And one of the rules for applying to join the EU is that you have to adopt the euro. That's the law. So it may not be within the choice of an independent Scotland. Now, so sure is Nicola of her position, and we checked on this, that she's never even checked with Europe what the law would be, because we wrote to the President, José Manuel Barroso of the European Commission, to ask if the SNP had ever checked what the status of an independent Scotland would be. And I have the letter that I got back from his office right here, which I'd be happy to pass across and let Nicola see, which states that not only has the Commission and the President of the Commission never been asked by the SNP either in government or in opposition, but no other commissioner has either. So fundamentally, the assertions that are coming from the SNP are based on nothing more than wishful thinking. And that's not enough to have people voting on the most important decision that they're going to make in their lifetime, and a decision that is irreversible.
I should say, That should have been submitted in evidence beforehand, so we could check that it's not actually
in Parliament, so it's not.
No, that was just from the Enlargement Commissioner. This is from the
legal
President of the
opinion
Commission.
from former judges in the European Court to former senior officials in the European Commission is quite clear. Firstly, about the fact that an independent Scotland would automatically be in the European Union, and we would not be compelled to be in the euro.
There seems to be a difference of legal opinion.
Okay, then has stated it categorically.
Thank you. We go to the audience and the gentleman here.
I just find that I really enjoy the news, and I read an awful lot on the news and current affairs, and I've followed the SNP and I've followed all the parties in front of me. If there was an obvious financial advantage of being independent, I would know that, and I would know that now, and I can't see it. And nobody's going to put money on a horse that they don't think is going to win. Nobody's going to buy a lottery ticket if they don't think it's going to win. Yes, the money can go in and fund the system, but can somebody in the SNP tell me what the financial advantage is to the country of independence?
Okay, this gentleman here in the blue shirt.
Hi, I'm really fed up with the money argument. I think there's this obsession with money. I think there's no link. There's no link between. Well, no, there's no link between money and happiness. Whether or not it would be £100 better off or £200 worse off, or anything. When you look, I'd like to see a happier and more self-confident Scotland. And when you look at, no, but that wouldn't make necessarily an impact upon our happiness. When you look at things that are happiness, it's not just about material comfort. There's things about a sense of community, whether people can make decisions, whether they've got an authentic lifestyle.
The tartan brand, Scottish brand, is one of the strongest in the world. I love being Scottish.
Okay, it's great that you're interacting, but we have to sort of calm it down a little bit. The gentleman behind you here. Yes, no, I'm sorry, we keep missing you, sir. It's the gentleman with the beard here. Yep, thank you.
I was quite horrified to see that nobody on the panel was going to say that over 10 years they expected Scotland to become better off. Now, and Patrick Harvey clearly sort of thinks it's quite likely we'll be poorer. Now, the world economy, outside the EU at least, is growing at 6% every year. That means at 10%, over 10 years, we will have doubled the size of the world economy. And yet, none of these people even expect that Scotland, an independent Scotland, would be in any way better off over that period. I think that's... I don't agree with the gentleman in front that finance is unimportant. I do want to live in a better off world.
Right. Thank you, sir. Now, up the back here, right in the middle at the back. Yes, thank you.
For the Europe and the Euro issue, shouldn't we get like clear-cut answers? Like we want like a yes or no. Will we be in Europe? Will we be in the Euro by the time if we're independent or not? Like why hasn't anyone like asked for a real yes or no answer of the Euro question?
Right, Nicholas Sturgeon, would an independent Scotland be in Europe and use the euro in the foreseeable future?
We would be in Europe, yes, and no, for the foreseeable future we would not use the euro.
And where's your evidence for that?
An important point in that as well is, look, we don't know the answer to that question because the legal advice hasn't been sought by the Scottish Government. They have the ability to seek that legal advice.
The legal opinion is clear on this point.
This is a really important point. The legal opinion that Nicola quotes is actually legal opinion pre the Lisbon Treaty, not post the Lisbon Treaty. That's crucial. And the reason why she quotes it is because
you can't go into the euro
the Scottish Government has the ability.
I think what we've established is that there's conflicting opinion.
What we're saying is John Swinney has the ability. John Swinney has the ability to write to the European Union to ask what the position would be and get the legal advice.
Thank you. And it's Patrick Harvey.
I have to admit, I'm finding this part of the debate a wee bit frustrating. Not just because I can barely hear when everybody's talking over each other, but also, you know, we're having this debate about, you know, whether we would join the euro. It's never been my party's policy to join the euro, but whether we would join the euro, whether we would have to, whether we'd be in the EU. Before we know what's even going to happen to the future of the European Union. None of us know where the European Union or the euro will be by 2014, never mind 2016, when, if we vote yes, Scotland would become independent or the Parliament would be elected to take on those powers. So I think we need a wee bit of realism about the uncertainties here. I agree to a certain extent with Anna Sarwar that there are problems with the idea of a currency union without a political union. And I think even though Scotland and the rest of the UK are closer together in terms of their economy at the moment, in reality they would diverge. If we were independent, they would diverge. And so I think if the SNP want to make a case that we should stay in sterling, that sterling should become a multi-state currency zone, I think we need to attach to that some kind of timescale that would move us away from that. And I think we should be willing to talk about, it might take 10 years, but I think we should be willing to talk about whether Scotland, as an independent country, could have an independent currency as well.
But at this juncture, are we confident that Scotland actually could stay in sterling? What's in it for Westminster and the rest of the UK? Patrick Harvey?
Well, that would be a question for the UK government, and it would be something that would require the UK government's consent. I accept that.
Nicholas Sturgeon?
Well, I mean, the figures I gave you earlier on, Scotland's oil and gas exports half the UK's balance of payments deficit. No UK government in its right mind would turn Scotland away on that basis. So it's got advantages for Scotland, as I outlined earlier on, but also huge advantages for the rest of the United Kingdom.
A direct question. How is it credible to have a foreign country set your interest rates, your spending limits and borrowing limits?
Our interest rates are set by the Bank of England. Our interest rates are set by the Bank of England just now. There's no Scottish representation on the Monetary Policy Committee, something that would change if Scotland was independent, and in addition we'd get the fiscal levers that we so badly need and don't have just now.
But
that's the logic of the argument.
The policy of the Bank of England is set by the Treasury.
So
the money is for the Treasury, and the Bank of England governor is appointed by the UK government.
Okay, as Patrick pointed out, there is no point in all of us talking over each other all of the time, and I really appreciate the fact that you feel very strongly about this. But just to clarify, Anna Sarwar, that is a point, that your leverage is your balance of payments, and who would turn down in a sterling zone the oil revenues and the whisky revenues
but the wider argument is that you have, at the moment, our biggest business partner is England. 50% of our exports, 50% of our business in Scotland is done with England.
And that would continue.
If we become absolutely, but if we become a separate country, our biggest business partner becomes our biggest business competitor. And in that environment, our biggest business competitor is setting our interest rates, our spending limits and our borrowing limits. That's not according to
Do you not agree with that?
But we're part of the United Kingdom. It's the United Kingdom's bank. If you leave the United Kingdom, it'll be a foreign country setting our interest rates.
This young lady at the front here, yeah.
Okay, I think the first thing we need to take into account is that none of the people on the panel can actually decide if we go into Europe or not. It's up to Europe to decide, not the SNP. And Ruth Davidson's the only one that's acknowledged that. And secondly, with regards to the sterling, I think it's more important to look at the relationship that we would have with the UK if we actually abandoned them. And I think it's more important to look at that and the effect that that would have on our financial situations.
Thank you for that. This young lady here. Yes, thank you.
Hi there. I want to go back to Ruth Davidson's earlier point about looking after the poorest in our society. Under the UK, currently people with disabilities are losing their benefits, single parents are losing their benefits, college students are losing their EMA. There are communities around Scotland that have been poor, underprivileged and have massive social problems for decades. How exactly is the UK looking after its poorest?
Yes, thank you, sir. Right at the back there. Yep, there with you.
Nicola, you are really, really annoying me. You're sitting on national television and you are lying. The Bank of England, okay, under the Bank of England Act 1998, no political party has representation on the MPC, and you're sitting there saying, guaranteed, a separate Scotland would have a representative on the Monetary Policy Committee. And secondly, at best, there is conflicting opinion about the EU, whether a separate Scotland would be in it or out it. And again, you're sitting saying 100% Scotland would be in it. That is just not the case. And I think it's an absolute disgrace.
Just to be accurate about this, I didn't suggest party political representation in the Monetary Policy Committee. The Chancellor of the Exchequer right now appoints, I think, 4 members to the MPC. What I'm suggesting is that a Scottish Finance Secretary could appoint somebody as well and give Scottish representation that we do not have just now. That's what I argued, and I think that would be preferable to the situation we're in right now.
Okay, this gentleman in the front row here. Thank you, sir. Yep.
Can I ask Nicola a question very directly, and it's about the principles of this issue. If you, as a nationalist, and you've launched your campaign on the basis you want people in Scotland to make decisions here, why would you as a nationalist want to leave a union whose long-term tendency is to devolve and localise power in Scotland to join one which wants to explicitly centralise power in the European Union over the long term? Why as a nationalist would you want that?
Not the UK, I know if you're talking about being decentralist.
And the gentleman here, thank you.
Yeah, Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP, may not have done their homework in this regard. Thankfully, Ruth Davidson has. Now, on the assumption that we would have to join the Euro to join the European Union, does that change your stance on things, Nicola?
It's not the case. And, you know, I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is...
No, because you haven't checked.
Ruth, you obviously haven't done your homework to find out that in order to be in the Euro, you first have to be in the European exchange rate mechanism for 2 years. We're not in that. There's no way that Europe can compel you into doing that. The legal opinion on this is absolutely clear. And no matter how hard you try to argue against it, it's clear.
That a separate Scotland would be an accession country to the European Union.
I think we've established that there is conflicting legal opinion on this and conflicting opinions. Just before we leave it, yes, this young woman in the front here. Yeah.
I think it's easy for pro-independence people to say that, well, what have the British government done to help inequality? But Glasgow and Scotland as a whole has a massive problem with inequality. And the SNP say we're going to have more social justice. But how are we going to have more social justice? How are you going to get to the root causes? Because successive governments have failed to do this. What makes us think that just because we now are independent that we're suddenly going to come up with some massive great solution?
Okay, and just before we leave it, the young man at the front.
Yes, what we're hearing is simply just the yes side throwing facts at us saying we will be better, this will be better, but what we need is actual hard facts and hard points. You know, they're just building on the austere situation in the UK at the moment. They're playing in the back of that. We don't want that. We want to hear the points and why and projections and what's going to happen to us in the future.
Okay. Right, we have to leave that there. Thank you all very much indeed for that. A quick mention now before we move on to the next question. If you'd like to find out more information on these and many other related issues, visit the Scotland's Future section on the BBC News website. You can find it by logging on to bbc.co.uk/Scotland's Future. Now, on to the next question, please, and it comes from Colin Campbell. Colin.
How would any future Scottish Government replace the defence-related jobs which will be inevitably lost post-independence?
Ruth Davidson.
Well, I'm not looking to split up the United Kingdom, so I'm not going to be able to answer that because I don't know how they could possibly replace those jobs. If you look at the moment, the MOD has 18,000 uniform and non-uniform personnel in Scotland across 30 of 32 local authorities. Beyond that, you have thousands of people that are involved in defence contraction, and we've already heard from the SNP that they want to get rid of some of our submarines at Faslane, which is the biggest single-site employer in the whole of Scotland. So, frankly, I mean, I am proud of our armed forces. I think our armed forces do a tremendous amount of work, and they do a tremendous amount of work because they are an integrated armed forces right across the whole of the UK. And the defence plans that were outlined by the SNP in January were frankly risible because they didn't take into account with their mobile army brigade, with their one naval base, with their one RAF base, that there wouldn't be anything like a logistics corps, an officer training school, that there wouldn't be engineering input, there wouldn't be an RAF regiment, there wouldn't be a Royal Naval Reserve, they wouldn't have any special forces. You know, frankly, they need to go back to the drawing board and come back. If they're serious about the first rule of government, which is protecting the nation that you serve, they have to go back to the drawing board and come back with something which is a credible plan for defence of an independent Scotland.
Okay. Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, what Ruth Davidson forgets to tell you is that Scotland has been shedding defence jobs for the last few years under both the previous Labour government and this Conservative government. Something like 10,000 defence jobs lost, air bases cut. That's the reality. We contribute more towards UK defence than is spent here in Scotland. Now, we would inherit the defence footprint that was in place in Scotland at the time of independence, and we would ensure that we had defence forces to protect Scotland's interests. And if you look at countries like Norway, similar in size to Scotland, Scotland's got one airbase, or is going to have one airbase. Norway has 7 air bases, so anybody that says that Scotland cannot support the kind of defence forces that we need is not looking at similar countries elsewhere in Europe. The one thing we wouldn't have, and I make no bones about this, we wouldn't have weapons of mass destruction on the River Clyde because we do not need them.
Just before we leave that point, when would they go, Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, that would be a matter for negotiation in the independence negotiations, but we would want to see Trident leaving the River Clyde as soon as possible. It's a weapon system that we cannot afford and don't need, and I don't think the majority of people in Scotland want to see them remain here in Scotland any longer than they absolutely have to. Okay?
This gentleman here with to the left, just here. Yep. Thank you, sir.
So, Nicola, have you had a word with BAE then? Are you guaranteeing that BAE will continue to build the English Navy?
Well, the MOD have just given a contract for a naval vessel to Korea. The idea that our skilled shipyards, with some of the best shipyard workers anywhere in the world, and I used to represent the Govan shipyard, couldn't still compete for orders, not just across the UK, but across the world, I don't think is based in reality, and I think it does a disservice to the men and women who work in those shipyards right now.
Anna Sarwar?
I'm sorry, Nicola, you're being disingenuous with that answer, because just 1 year ago you tweeted to say that if we didn't have the aircraft carrier contract from the MOD, it would mean the end of shipbuilding industry in Scotland. The reality is the UK only commissions warships from UK companies. If we're no longer part of the United Kingdom, why would it commission warships in the UK? So the reason why the Korea vessel went is because there was no UK contract, and also it wasn't a warship. There was no UK submission for that project. But the other important point about Trident...
And so are you suggesting the Scottish Yards, if Scotland goes independent, the Scottish Yards, against international competition, won't compete successfully?
What I'm saying to you is one of the proudest things that we have, one thing that demonstrates the positive case for the UK is the fantastic shipbuilding industry we have, particularly on the Clyde, but also in Scotland.
Well, wouldn't that enable it to compete?
But the key thing is that the UK has never commissioned a warship out with the UK.
And
why would it do it again? And that's why Nicola herself said in her own tweet that actually it would be the obliteration of the shipbuilding industry in Scotland. The other point about NATO, which is really, really important for those of us that don't believe in nuclear weapons. Look, I don't simply want to get nuclear weapons out of the Clyde and think actually that's fine, we'll be fine, we'll be safe. I want to see. I don't think it's credible to say let's move a few hundred miles down the M74 and that's okay. We want to obliterate nuclear weapons, not just from Scotland, but from right across the UK and right around the world. That's why we're internationalists, not nationalists.
Right. Let's at this point go to Alex Early in the audience. Alex, you had a specific question about nuclear.
My question is, on the subject of Trident, when the day comes, or if or when the day comes when Scotland's independent, who picks up the tab for the removal of these weapons from Scottish waters?
Nicola Sturgeon.
I think these would be matters for negotiation, but I think Scotland's more than shared its burden of Trident over the past number of years, and I think people in Scotland want to see a day when we no longer have Trident nuclear missiles on the River Clyde, and the only way to ensure that happens is to vote yes in the independence referendum.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon, just to clarify that point. Actually, if you vote yes in the independence referendum, you get an independent Scotland. What happens thereafter may be that you get a Green majority government. I
think the Greens want to get rid of Trident as well.
They do, but you may get a Labour majority government. So to say vote yes for independence, you get rid of Trident, may not actually necessarily be the case.
Well, people then have the right to vote for parties that can form a government that can get rid of Trident. We don't have that option without independence.
Thank you. Patrick Harvey.
Well, we've clearly demonstrated over a number of years that the majority of Scotland's people, of Scotland's MSPs and of Scotland's MPs are opposed to Trident. I think there's very little chance that you'd have a pro-Trident government. I think that we've got the opportunity to go even further and have a constitutional prohibition on weapons of mass destruction. We'd be probably, I think, the second country in the world to do that, to have a constitutional bar on the operation or use of weapons of mass destruction. But we can go even further than that again. I probably won't be surprising many people when I say that the Greens don't just want to reproduce a small section of the UK defence infrastructure or policy or overseas use of it in Scotland. I don't want weapons of mass destruction not just because they're wrong, but because they're unnecessary. I don't want perhaps the same position on aircraft carriers that Nicola had, because those machines are simply about the aggressive projection of power around the world. I'd like to redefine what security and defence mean in the 21st century, because the real threats to human well-being in the 21st century are not going to be about defending borders, certainly not the border that Scotland would have with England. It's about poverty, it's about water, it's about food, it's about energy, it's about climate change. These are the real threats to human well-being and security in the 21st century, and they will need a fundamentally different set of defence and security answers than just reproducing the same UK policy.
Yes. Because I think one of the things that has really served Scotland and the UK well through the years, through the defence, has been standing shoulder to shoulder with our allies and being part of NATO.
Country?
And being part of NATO has been NATO is the strongest defence alliance around the world, the greatest history. Now, I know
we were required to stand alongside
lots.
allies in Iraq. Come on.
Well, frankly,
we had no choice about it.
Having been to Kosovo and seen some of the work that our troops did there, preventing ethnic cleansing, I'm proud of the work that NATO has done. And I know that Alex Salmond called our mission in Kosovo unpardonable folly, but frankly, I'm proud of what we did in the Balkans, right on our doorstep. And what I would like to ask Nicola is, has the SNP decided yet what its position is going to be on NATO? Because we don't know.
Well, I know the SNP's current policy is that we wouldn't be in NATO, we'd be in partnership for peace, like Sweden, for example, not in NATO, but in partnership for peace. They took part in the recent mission in Libya, but they're not in NATO. That's
Does
the SNP's
everyone
policy
in your party feel that way?
Sorry, what? I'm sure there, as in many parties, there's debates about policy issues.
Well, it's supposed to be a debate on the 29th. Why has that been moved?
Well, because we don't know yet what the UK government's defence and security review is going to do to our armed forces in Scotland. We'll debate these things at our annual conference when we get more information of the cuts your government is making to our defence forces.
Which Alex Salmond welcomed on the 18th of July last year in the STV.
Yes. It's not going to work if we just start interviewing each other off camera there. So the gentleman here.
Can someone please tell me, who are Scotland going to nuke with this weapon?
And the gentleman behind here. Yes, you say, yeah.
The fact is, it was said many years ago now that you cannot uninvent nuclear weapons. And the reality is, if we take some sort of moral stance that we are not going to have them, we then have to hope that some of the lunatic extremist people around will play the gentleman and not attack us because we haven't got nuclear weapons. Life isn't that simple. We need to be adequately defended.
Yes, can I just get a few more from the audience first, Patrick? The gentleman in the red check shirt, please.
I'm a member of the SNP, as Nicola knows, and I'm very much pro-NATO, and I'm pro that the American submarine fleet remains at Faslane. So I would say that the SNP really needs to have the debate, and we really need to move towards being in NATO, because that is the shield of Western defence, and we really need to be in it.
Thank you, sir. The lady here in the green top. Yes, this one here. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Mr Sarwar. He said that he himself would like to obliterate nuclear weapons, not just from Scotland but from England as well. It's my understanding that that's also Joanne Lamont's personal view, but because it's not the personal view of the Labour Party across the UK, the Scottish Labour Party are unable to take forward their views. So surely that shows that you're not able, as a Scottish Labour Party or as a Scottish party at all, to put forward what you consider to be the programme for this country that you want, because you're obstructed by the UK.
It's actually not true. The last Labour government was the most active government in terms of nuclear disarmament, in terms of reducing the number of warheads that we had. And our point is this, look, it's not credible to say, look, as long as we feel good about ourselves, as long as there's no weapons on the Clyde, let's move them a couple of 100 miles down the M74 and everything will be fine. I don't think that's credible. I think those of us that don't believe in nuclear weapons, those of us that don't believe in weapons of mass destruction, want them away from not just Scotland, the rest of the United Kingdom and right around the world too. I think that's a credible policy. I just don't think the SNP's position is credible at all.
I agree with that. I would like to see nuclear weapons removed from the world completely. I would like to see the UK government not just supporting the current Trident missile system, but planning, as the last Labour government did, to replace the Trident missile system. But as long as we've got a UK government that supports Trident, I think it's perfectly reasonable for the people of Scotland to say we don't want it in the River Clyde, we don't want it in Scotland.
Patrick Harvey, can you pick up on the point about the fact we need a nuclear deterrent for our own security?
Well, I don't believe in nuclear deterrence. Whom does it deter and from what? I don't think it's a credible argument. But the response to Anas and also to the gentleman near the back of the room, this seems to be about this debate about unilateral disarmament versus multilateral disarmament. And if we emphasise multilateral disarmament, then we'll make the whole world a lot safer place. And I understand why some people have moved from that unilateralist to a multilateralist position. But what the UK government is doing right now is not multilateral disarmament, it's unilateral rearmament. The decision to replace Trident with a new weapon of mass destruction. Now, if we in Scotland, whether through voting yes or through political pressure, and I think it can be done by voting yes to independence, actually say this cannot exist in Scottish waters, we will help to tip the balance within the UK defence argument, because there are many in the UK defence services who don't think this is a legitimate and a sensible and a rational use of money. Many of them would say that this should not be pursued even at UK level. I think we can help to tip the balance, because there are precious few other places this system could be moved to in England or in Wales, and I think that if Scotland said no and got rid of Trident from Scottish waters, we'd help to tip the balance in the UK, and they wouldn't end up replacing them. I think it'd be a profoundly positive step forward.
Thank you for that. And just a final comment from the gentleman in the front here. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So many of the arguments we've heard tonight just scream to me that we should be voting for independence, because whether we're going to be in sterling or a member of the EU or retain the monarchy or get rid of nuclear weapons, all of these decisions can be made by us as a sovereign independent nation. But only once we're independent. We seem to be getting away from the discussion tonight. Many of these debates and many of these arguments are surely going to be held at the first Scottish elections after independence. If the Labour Party want to retain Trident, let them put it in their manifesto for an independent Scotland and see what the people of Scotland say.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you all, and thanks for that. Now, let's go on to our next question, please, and it's from Sandra Webster. Sandra.
Hello. Can Scotland be independent if the monarchy is retained?
Patrick.
Well, yes. I think there are other countries which share the British monarchy, which I couldn't say are not independent because of that. I don't think that we should retain the hereditary principle in a modern country. I think that's a point of principle, and I would be far more comfortable if we had an elected head of state rather than retaining the monarchy. You know, there's a debate that's due next week in the Scottish Parliament about the Jubilee, and we're all expected to go along and say nice things and clap and all agree that isn't the monarchy wonderful. And I in my own life, I don't know anyone who takes it remotely seriously. You know, I think that there's a latent republicanism that maybe doesn't call itself republicanism. Maybe it just thinks the monarchy is a wee bit silly and that we could do a bit better. But I think that we should be willing to have that debate. And it seems to me bizarre to debate creating a new independent country without having a broad, open debate about how you choose the head of state in that independent country. So I hope that we do have that. And it's an issue that the SNP are going to have to come to when they publish their white paper. I think there's going to have to be space in that white paper for a debate about how you achieve a written constitution. How do you have a participative process in Scotland that draws together public views and creates a written constitution that we can then adopt democratically? It may be that most people would want to keep the monarchy. I would vote against that, but we need at least to have the debate.
Patrick and I may share the same city, but I think we must have vastly different social circles, because I think...
I'm sure you do.
That's fair enough. Actually, I mean, I look at the service that the Queen's given down the last few decades, in fact, over all of her reign, and you know, I'm proud that she's been my head of state, and I think she's done a remarkable job. And I also think when you look at some of the political leaders that we've had, whether it would be a wannabe President Blair or a wannabe President Salmond, actually, I quite like the idea you have a non-political head that functions in that kind of civic space in the UK, and I appreciate that.
Okay. Nicola? Well, in direct answer to the question, of course you can be independent with the Queen remaining as head of state. There are plenty of countries in exactly that position. The Union of the Crowns predates the political union between Scotland and England, and in many respects is separate to that. I support retaining the Queen as head of state because in many ways I think it symbolises the strong social union that would continue to exist notwithstanding Scotland winning political and economic independence, and I think that was a good thing.
Sandra, in asking the question, what do you think is the answer?
Well, I'm from the perspective, I'm a feminist Republican, and I believe that the people of Scotland should decide, who we have as the head of state. And I don't believe that if a monarchy is totally invalidated, and the people should decide.
Okay. Anna Sarah?
Well, I support the monarchy, but the interesting point is more than that. It's the number of U-turns that we'll have leading up to that referendum in 2014, if we ever eventually have it, if the SNP show the bottle and call it. And that is, we can keep the pound, we can keep the monarchy, we can keep all the lovely things that you like about the UK, but see the things you don't like, we'll change them and nothing bad will ever happen. I don't think that's credible. I think what the SNP need to really do is actually tell us what independence really means. It goes back to the lady's point earlier on about social justice. That's the real agenda facing politics at the moment. Nicola's priority is to separate us from the United Kingdom. My priority is to make David Cameron the next unemployment statistic. That's the difference. It's because we want a kind of Scotland where actually we have that better off a country, a greener country, a more prosperous country. And I don't think it's credible to say one of the first policies that we'll have in that separate country is to reduce corporation tax for the biggest businesses in the country and at the same time slash public spending and hammering public services right across the country.
Mr. Sauer, on the specific of the monarchy?
As I say, I support the principle of the monarchy.
And you would support the principle of the monarchy in an independent Scotland?
Absolutely, but I just see it as another U-turn from the SNP, and I wonder which more are going to come between now and 2014.
OK, let's go back to the audience. This gentleman at the front here, yes.
I was actually born and raised in a country where you elect the head of state. And I can tell you, I don't want to go down that road here.
Okay.
I really don't. Possibly the German model, but I cannot see the American or South American model or the model in a lot of countries where there's a competitive party election for head of state with the waste and the money that is involved. I just don't want it here.
OK, this gentleman here. Yes.
We have Elizabeth II. Now, I'm ex-army, so God bless her. But we have Elizabeth II. We never had Elizabeth I. Now, Charles doesn't want to be Charles III. Apparently, he wants to be George VII. Well, when we become independent, not if, when we become independent, if we don't want Charles III or George VII, I opt we go for Princess Anne. She's chairman of the Scottish Rugby Union.
Oh, thank you for that. Thanks very much indeed. And now let's just go on to our last question from Francesca Pieri. Francesca.
Hi, who would you like to see representing Scotland at the Eurovision Song Contest?
See, it gets tougher. It gets tougher as we go along.
Can I jump in here, and this may be giving my age away, I don't know if anyone remembers a TV programme called The High Life with Forbes Masson and Alan Cumming, and they had a great song called Piff Paff Poff. I thought that was a genius entry to Eurovision, I have to say.
And that's what you're suggesting?
Well, do you know, it was only fiction, but it's only, a hair away from facts, so yeah.
I'm tempted to go all po-face and say Sweden's success shows what a small independent country can achieve. But I think, I'm not sure they'd agree, but I think it would be great to see the Proclaimers give Jedward a run for their money.
Are you going to sing Can You Hear the Drums, Fernando? Is that
I'm not going to sing anything, Isabel, for the benefit of
Anna
everybody.
Sauer, did you vote for Engelbert?
Well, as someone who is passionately proud to be Scottish, but also proud of the fact we're part of the United Kingdom, I've got to be honest and say one of the pluses, and probably the only plus of being separate, is perhaps we wouldn't have the hump representing us at the Eurovision Song Contest.
Yeah. Who should represent us?
I think the Proclaimers are a good shout. I'm sure there's lots of fantastic Scottish bands and Scottish artists that we could promote. But actually, I don't think we're going to be at that stage. I think we'll be proudly part of the United Kingdom come the referendum.
Patrick.
Well, I couldn't bring myself to vote this year either, but I think.
This year?
Yeah. I think, one maybe half-serious point is about the way the political voting happens in Eurovision, and countries voting for each other year after year. I think if we vote yes, and if we establish a new, friendly, respectful, mutually supportive relationship with our neighbours down south, I think you could see year after year Scotland and England voting 12 points to each other, as predictable as clockwork.
OK, and I'm afraid we're right out of time. On that note, literally, we'll have to leave it. Patrick, we're right out of time. But absolutely, thanks to everybody here in the studio for taking part. And of course, thanks to you very much at home for tuning in. There will be more debates to come here on BBC Scotland, so please do join us again for those. For now, though, a very good night to you.